The night was darker than usual, a moonless sky stretching infinitely above me, as I stood by the side of an empty road with nothing but a small duffel bag and my thumbs sticking out in desperation. It was a choice born out of necessity, not stupidity. At least that's what I kept telling myself. My car had broken down miles back, and my phone had died shortly after. With no signal for miles, the thought of walking all the way to civilization seemed unbearable. Hitchhiking was my only option. I wasn't particularly comfortable with the idea. Stories of hitchhiking gone wrong flashed in my mind, but I convinced myself that those were just rare cases, exceptions to the rule. I needed to get home. It was supposed to be a short trip, just a quick weekend visit to an old friend in a neighboring town. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, figuring there was no need. Now, stranded in the middle of nowhere, I regretted that decision more than anything. The first car I flagged down sped past without even a second glance. I sighed, shivering in the cool night air. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, flanked by dense forests that seemed to swallow any sound. Occasionally, I heard the rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig. My imagination played tricks on me, turning harmless nocturnal animals into unseen predators lurking in the shadows. Eventually, headlights appeared in the distance, their glow growing brighter as they approached. I raised my hand again, waving it frantically. To my relief, the car slowed down and pulled over. It was an old pickup truck, the kind that had seen better days. The driver leaned over and rolled down the passenger side window. He was a middle-aged man with a wiry build, wearing a plaid shirt and a baseball cap. His face was weathered, with a scruffy beard and piercing eyes that seemed to study me intently. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Yeah, my car broke down a few miles back," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I just need to get to the nearest town." He nodded, gesturing for me to hop in. "Hop in. I'm headed that way." I hesitated for a moment, but the cold and the isolation won out. Climbing into the passenger seat, I placed my bag at my feet and buckled up. The interior of the truck was cluttered with fast food wrappers and the faint smell of stale cigarettes hung in the air. The man didn't say much at first, his focus on the road ahead. "Name's Dale," he said after a while, breaking the silence. "I'm Mark," I replied. "Thanks for stopping." "No problem. Not many people out on this road at this hour," he said, glancing at me briefly before returning his gaze to the road. "You're lucky I came by." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl, but I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, I guess I am." We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds coming from the hum of the engine and the occasional bump of the tires against the uneven road. I tried to relax, telling myself that this was just a harmless guy doing a good deed. But there was something about him that set me on edge. Maybe it was the way he kept sneaking glances at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Or maybe it was the way his hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. "So, where you headed?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Just to the nearest town," I said. "I'll figure things out from there." He nodded, but didn't say anything more. The uneasy silence returned, stretching on until it became almost unbearable. I tried to make small talk, asking him about his truck, the area, anything to fill the void. He answered in short, curt sentences, never offering much detail. After a while, I noticed that the road seemed to be getting narrower, the trees on either side growing closer together. It didn't look like the kind of route that led to a town. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual. "Hey, are we still on the main road?" I asked. Dale glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Shortcut," he said simply. "Saves time." I didn't like the sound of that, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe he really did know a faster way. Still, my gut told me something was off. I reached for my bag, pretending to adjust it, and subtly felt for the small pocket knife I always carried. My fingers closed around it, and I felt a small surge of relief. "You don't trust me, do you?" Dale said suddenly, his voice sharp. I froze, caught off guard. "What?" "No, it's not that." "I get it," he said, cutting me off. You hear stories about hitchhiking, about people like me. Makes you paranoid. His tone was calm, almost amused, but there was an edge to it that made my heart race. I forced a laugh, trying to diffuse the tension. No, it's nothing like that. I'm just not used to this kind of situation. He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the road. The truck slowed down as we approached a clearing, and he pulled over, putting the vehicle in park. My pulse quickened as I glanced around. There was nothing here, just trees and darkness. Why are we stopping? I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound calm. Dale turned to me, a sly smile creeping across his face. Nature call, he said. Unless you need to go too? I shook my head quickly. No, I'm good. He chuckled, opening the driver's side door and stepping out. Be right back. As soon as he disappeared into the trees, I reached for my bag and pulled out the pocket knife. My hands were trembling, but I felt a little better knowing I had some form of protection. I debated whether to make a run for it, but I had no idea where I was or how far the nearest town might be. Staying put seemed like the safer option, at least for now. Minutes passed, and Dale didn't return. The longer I sat there, the more uneasy I became. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if he was waiting in the shadows, watching me? What if this was all a setup? Suddenly, I heard a noise outside, the crunch of footsteps on gravel. I gripped the knife tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps grew closer, and then Dale appeared, climbing back into the truck as if nothing had happened. He didn't say a word, just started the engine and pulled back onto the road. I couldn't take it anymore. You know what? I think I'll just walk from here, I said, trying to sound casual as I reached for the door handle. Dale's hand shot out, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. Don't be stupid, he said, his voice low and menacing. You'll never make it on foot. Panic surged through me as I struggled to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Let go of me! I shouted, the knife slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. Dale's eyes flicked to the knife, and his expression darkened. What the hell is this? He growled, letting go of my arm to snatch it up. I didn't think, I just acted. I threw open the door and tumbled out of the truck, hitting the ground hard. Scrambling to my feet, I took off running into the woods, adrenaline propelling me forward. Behind me, I heard Dale's voice shouting, followed by the sound of his heavy footsteps. The forest was dense and disorienting, branches scratching at my face and arms as I pushed through. I didn't dare look back, my only focus on putting as much distance as possible between me and Dale. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were on fire, but I didn't stop. Finally, I saw a light in the distance, a faint, flickering glow that gave me a sliver of hope. I ran toward it, stumbling into a small campsite where a group of people sat around a fire. They looked up in surprise as I burst into the clearing, gasping for breath. Help me! I managed to choke out. He's after me! Before they could respond, Dale emerged from the trees, his expression twisted with anger. But the sight of the group seemed to give him pause. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, his eyes darting between me and the others. One of the campers, a burly man with a stern expression, stood up and stepped forward. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice steady and authoritative. Dale hesitated, then shook his head. No problem, he said, his tone suddenly calm. Just a misunderstanding. Without another word, he turned and disappeared back into the woods. I collapsed to the ground, trembling as the adrenaline began to wear off. The campers surrounded me, offering water and assurances that I was safe. The police were called, and I gave them a detailed description of Dale and his truck. They assured me they would search the area, but I never found out if they caught him. All I knew was that I had survived, and I would never, ever hitchhike again. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through an ocean of emptiness. It was just past midnight, and the silence of the world around me was almost oppressive. My car had sputtered its last breath nearly an hour ago, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. I was left with little choice but to hitchhike, a gamble that felt increasingly desperate with each passing minute. I had always been cautious, the type of person who would triple-check door locks and avoid dark alleys. Hitchhiking wasn't something I ever thought I'd resort to, but desperation has a way of changing your priorities. The night was cold, the wind biting through my jacket as I walked along the shoulder of the road. My thumb was out, and I tried to project an air of harmlessness to the sparse vehicles that passed by. Most sped on without even slowing, their taillights disappearing into the distance. Finally, a pair of headlights appeared on the horizon. As they approached, the vehicle slowed and came to a stop just ahead of me. It was a white van, the kind with no windows in the back, the kind every urban legend warns you about. My instincts screamed at me to turn and run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. The driver rolled down the window, revealing a man in his late 40s with a kind smile and glasses that reflected the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice warm and reassuring. I hesitated, glancing at the empty road behind me. There wasn't likely to be another car for miles. Against my better judgment, I nodded. "Yeah, my car broke down a while back. Thanks for stopping." He gestured to the passenger door. "Hop in. It's not safe out here." The interior of the van smelled faintly of pine air freshener, though the faint scent of something metallic lingered underneath. I ignored it and settled into the seat, placing my backpack on my lap like a makeshift shield. The man introduced himself as Gary, and as the van rumbled back onto the road, he asked the usual small-talk questions: where I was headed, what I did for a living. His demeanor was pleasant enough, but something about him felt slightly off. "You're lucky I came along," Gary said, glancing at me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Not many cars on this stretch of road at night." "Yeah," I replied, forcing a chuckle. "Guess I am." As we drove, the landscape outside the van grew darker and more remote. The trees lining the road became denser, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. I noticed that Gary kept glancing at me, his eyes lingering just a moment too long before returning to the road. "So, what do you do for fun?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. The question caught me off guard. I guess I like hiking. Camping sometimes." He nodded, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "The outdoors are great. So quiet, so peaceful. You ever go hiking alone?" "Sometimes," I said cautiously, my unease growing. His tone had shifted, becoming almost predatory. I glanced at the door handle, wondering if I'd have the presence of mind to jump out if things went south. The van slowed unexpectedly, and Gary pulled onto a narrow dirt path that led into the woods. My stomach churned. "What are you doing?" "Shortcut," he said casually, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. "This will save us some time." Every alarm bell in my head went off at once. "I'm fine sticking to the main road," I said, my voice wavering. He chuckled, a low, unsettling sound. "Relax. I've been driving these roads for years. Trust me." The path grew rougher, the van jostling with every pothole and rock. I clutched my backpack tightly, my fingers brushing against the small pocket knife I always carried. Gary's questions became more personal, his tone more insistent. "Got family waiting for you?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Yeah," I lied. "They're expecting me soon." His smile widened, and for the first time, I saw the malice hidden beneath his friendly facade. "That's nice. Always good to have someone waiting for you." The van came to an abrupt stop in a clearing surrounded by dense trees. Gary turned off the engine and twisted in his seat to face me, his smile now gone. "You know, you really shouldn't trust strangers." Before I could react, he lunged at me, his hands aiming for my throat. I barely managed to yank the knife from my bag and slash wildly, catching his arm. He let out a howl of pain, giving me just enough time to shove the door open and tumble out of the van. I hit the ground hard, the impact jarring my senses, but adrenaline drove me to my feet. Gary was already coming after me, blood dripping from the gash on his arm. I bolted into the woods, the darkness swallowing me whole. Branches tore at my clothes and skin as I ran, the sound of Gary's heavy footsteps close behind. "You can't run forever!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. "I know these woods better than you do." My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were on fire, but I didn't stop. I spotted a faint glow in the distance, a cabin, its windows illuminated by the warm flicker of firelight. I sprinted toward it, my last shred of hope clinging to the idea of finding help. Bursting through the cabin's door, I startled an elderly man who had been sitting by the fireplace. His eyes widened as he took in my disheveled appearance, and the terror etched on my face. "Please," I gasped. "He's coming. He's trying to kill me." The old man didn't ask questions. He grabbed a shotgun from the wall and motioned for me to stay behind him. Moments later, Gary appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. "This has nothing to do with you, old man," Gary growled. "Hand him over, and I'll leave you alone." The old man raised the shotgun, his expression unyielding. "Get off my property before I blow your head off." Gary hesitated, his eyes darting between us. Finally, he took a step back, his hands raised in mock surrender. All right. I'm leaving." He disappeared into the night, and the old man locked the door behind him. I collapsed onto a chair, shaking uncontrollably as the reality of what had just happened sank in. The police were called, and by the time they arrived, Gary was long gone. They assured me they'd searched the area, but deep down, I knew he'd gotten away. I never hitchhiked again. The memory of Gary's predatory smile and the chase through the woods haunted me for years. And every time I drove down a lonely stretch of road, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the headlights of a white van trailing behind me. The stretch of highway was a desolate, endless ribbon of gray, cutting through a vast expanse of wilderness. The clock on my dashboard had stopped at 11:47 p.m., but I knew it was well past midnight. My car had died abruptly, stranding me in the middle of nowhere, far from any semblance of civilization. I leaned against the hood, frustration coursing through me. The moon hung low, casting a pale light over the empty road, and I realized I had no choice but to walk and hope for a ride. I wasn't the type to take risks. My life had been meticulously planned, structured and secure. Hitchhiking wasn't just out of my comfort zone, it was outright terrifying. But the alternative was to wait by the road all night in the biting cold, with no guarantee of help arriving. With reluctance, I slung my backpack over my shoulder and began walking, my thumbs sticking out as I faced the occasional car that sped by without even slowing. After what felt like hours, headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter and closer until they finally slowed. The vehicle, an old, rusted pickup truck, pulled up beside me. The driver rolled down his window. He was a man in his 50s, with a wiry frame and a face weathered by years of hard labor. He wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and his smile revealed crooked teeth. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. I hesitated. Every horror story I'd ever heard about hitchhiking flashed through my mind. But I was exhausted, cold, and desperate. "Yeah," I said finally. "Thanks." He gestured to the passenger side. "Hop in." The interior of the truck was cluttered, with fast food wrappers and tools scattered across the floor. I climbed in, clutching my backpack tightly on my lap. The man introduced himself as Dale and asked where I was headed. His tone was friendly enough, but there was an underlying edge to his words that set me on edge. "What brings you out here so late?" he asked as we pulled back onto the highway. "Car broke down," I replied, keeping my answer short. "No signal to call for help." He nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. "Lucky I came along then. Not a lot of folks travel this way after dark." The truck rattled as it picked up speed, and I noticed the faint smell of gasoline mixed with something metallic. Dale kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, his expression unreadable. The unease in my stomach grew with each passing mile. "You from around here?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just passing through." He nodded again, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "It's a lonely stretch of road. Easy to get lost." Something in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to appear calm, but my fingers were gripping the straps of my backpack so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I glanced out the window, searching for landmarks, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. The only thing visible was the faint outline of trees rushing by. "You know," Dale said, his voice lower now, "people always think they're safe until they're not." My heart rate spiked. "What do you mean?" He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Just that you can't trust everyone you meet." The words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. I forced myself to stay calm, trying to think of a way to extricate myself from the situation. My phone was useless with no signal, and jumping out of a moving vehicle wasn't an option. I needed a plan. As if sensing my discomfort, Dale turned onto a narrow dirt road that led into the woods. "Shortcut," he said, his voice casual. "Don't worry." Every instinct screamed at me to get out of the truck. "I'd rather stick to the main road," I said, trying to keep my tone even. He didn't respond. The truck jostled over the uneven path, the trees closing in around us. My hand drifted to my backpack, where I kept a small can of pepper spray. I slipped it into my pocket, my fingers gripping it tightly. "You ever hear about the people who disappear out here?" Dale asked suddenly, his voice breaking the tense silence. I didn't answer. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me. The truck came to a stop in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Dale turned off the engine and twisted in his seat to face me, his expression unreadable. "You're not from around here," he said, almost to himself. "No one would miss you if something happened." My blood ran cold. Without thinking, I yanked the door handle and jumped out of the truck, stumbling as I hit the ground. Dale was out in an instant, his footsteps heavy behind me as I darted into the woods. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows, the branches clawing at my clothes as I ran blindly. I could hear Dale's voice calling after me, taunting and cruel. "You can't outrun me! These woods go on forever!" I didn't look back. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my legs felt like they were made of lead, but fear propelled me forward. The faint glow of a firelight appeared ahead, and I sprinted toward it with everything I had left. I burst into a small campsite, startling a group of 3 hikers who were sitting around a fire. They jumped to their feet, alarmed by my sudden appearance and disheveled state. "Please," I gasped. "There's a man, he's trying to kill me." The hikers exchanged looks before one of them, a burly man with a beard, stepped forward. "Stay here," he said, grabbing a hatchet from his pack. "We'll handle this." Moments later, Dale emerged from the trees, his face twisted with rage. He stopped short when he saw the group, his eyes narrowing. "This has nothing to do with you," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Hand him over, and I'll leave." The bearded man stepped between us, his stance firm. "You're not taking anyone. Get out of here before this gets ugly." Dale hesitated, his gaze shifting between the group and me. Finally, he sneered and backed away. "This isn't over," he said before disappearing into the woods. The hikers stayed with me until morning, their presence a comforting shield against the darkness. When the sun rose, we made our way back to the main road, where we flagged down a passing car. I reported the incident to the police, but they found no trace of Dale or his truck. The experience haunted me for years. I never set foot on that highway again, and the memory of Dale's words lingered in my mind. "You can't trust everyone you meet." It was a lesson I would never forget. Hey everyone, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. As a broke college student editing all my videos on an Android phone, It takes a lot of effort to bring these stories to life. A laptop would help me create better content faster, so if you enjoy my work, please subscribe and share. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much.